Hi, I'm Dr. Keith McCormick, and welcome to part 2 of this series on osteoporosis. I'm glad you could join me again. In the first video, I talked about the constant renewal process that bone undergoes called remodeling, and how important it is for the phases of resorption and formation to stay in perfect balance if bone is to stay healthy and strong. In this second video, I'll explain how and why bone remodeling can get out of kilter and lead to bone loss. Unfortunately, the list of things that can do this, things like smoking and excessive alcohol intake, low body weight, the list is pretty long. And there's even lots of diseases that can lead to bone loss, like hyperparathyroidism, diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, and the list is quite lengthy. Medications can also cause bone loss. Glucocorticoids for pain and inflammation, anti-seizure medications, PPIs for GERD, and SSRIs, or serotonin reuptake inhibitors, for depression and anxiety. Plus, there's others, and all of these things, all these factors have to be taken into account when you're being evaluated for osteopenia or osteoporosis. Of course, osteoporosis can simply be due to nutrient deficiency, too little calcium or vitamin D, but that's actually pretty rare. There's usually more involved than just that. And by far, the most common cause for osteoporosis is a condition called chronic systemic inflammation. This inflammation can be the result of the immune system being overly activated for long periods of time. And when the immune system is constantly being used by the body to protect itself from, say, toxins or free radicals, physical or emotional stress, food sensitivities, allergies, bacterial overgrowth in the gut, high blood glucose, diabetes, oxidative stress, well, all of these things and many others, they can all keep the immune system constantly working overtime. It's so much so that the immune system kind of goes crazy and gets out of balance and starts releasing high amounts of these potentially damaging molecules called pro-inflammatory cytokines. And these cytokines, they're normally used by the cell for signaling purposes. It's a way for different cells to talk to each other, but the immune system, for example, directs the inflammatory response against microbes by using cytokines to direct the actions of white blood cells. When the cytokines are released in excess for long periods of time, they end up harming the body. And they can put the body into this steep downward spiral, making it very susceptible to developing diseases. In fact, most of all chronic diseases, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, cancer, arthritis, and yes, even osteoporosis, are caused to a great extent by chronic systemic inflammation. So how do you know if you have this type of inflammation? It's not like you can see it. It doesn't usually turn red and make you swell like acute inflammation does. And in fact, chronic systemic inflammation can be pretty silent. Just like osteoporosis can be silent. You don't know it a lot of times until you break. And if you want to find out more about chronic systemic inflammation, check out my book, The Whole Body Approach to Osteoporosis. I even outline in there some lab tests that you can use to track it down, to see if you might have it. But for now, let's take a closer look at how the immune and the skeletal systems interact. To really understand what's going on here, we need to look at the ancestral family tree of the osteoclasts and osteoblasts. Just like people who grow up in the same area in the world, even though they may be different, come from different families and stuff, they still speak the same language. And they can still communicate with each other very well. And this is also true with cells in your body. Cells that are born and develop within the same little niche of the body, even though they may be different types of cells, different kinds of cells, they still speak the same or similar language. And because they use the same signaling molecules. And this is the whole key, not only to understanding chronic systemic inflammation, but also the cause of osteoporosis. And it's the key to understanding how you can fix it. So in the bone marrow, we have two types of stem cells. Now, the stem cells can divide almost indefinitely and can differentiate into many types of specialized cells. But in your bones, you have two major types of adult stem cells. One called the hematopoietic stem cells and the other mesenchymal. So the hematopoietic stem cells, they can differentiate into red blood cells, platelets, white blood cells of different types, including monocytes and T cells. And they can differentiate into osteoclasts. The mesenchymal stem cells, they can differentiate into cartilage cells for your joints, fat cells, or osteoblasts in your bones. And because these cells all develop within the same confines, within the same crucible or your bone, and because they have similar ancestry, they all speak the same language. And here's the key, right here at the white blood cells. The T cells direct the other white blood cells, including the monocytes, to do various jobs within the immune system. And they do this through signaling molecules, molecules that can, yes, be heard by other cells, and especially the osteoclasts. So if the T cells yell loud enough, they produce all kinds of excessive amounts of rancor because the whole immune system is confused and unbalanced, and because it's been under constant stress, then instead of the rancor activating and producing more white blood cells, it's almost like there's a switch that's been pulled that diverts the differentiation of this line of cells to not produce more white blood cells, but instead to the formation and activation of more osteoclasts. So this is what happens in chronic systemic inflammation. And now, under this catabolic destructive state, we not only have rancor being produced by the osteoblasts, but also in high amounts from the T cells, because the body's in chronic systemic inflammation. When you have the rancor from the T cells and from the osteoblasts, we have excessive numbers of osteoclasts being formed and an aggressive amount of bone being degraded. But there is good news, and that is that we now know about chronic systemic inflammation. We've come a long way from simply looking at calcium to fend off osteoporosis. We now know that there are these destructive forces, that not just nutrient deficiencies, behind much of chronic diseases, including osteoporosis, and we now know how to stop it. And that's exactly what I'll be talking about in part 3 of this video series. So until then, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you back here for part 3, and take care and stay strong. I'm Dr. McCormick.